so much. We just appreciate you guys coming. We got a bunch of stuff to fire hose you with today. As always with these calls, we want to make sure that you have a chance as well to interact. We are okay. I know sometimes when we get above 30, it gets really weird to feel like you're interrupting the call. We just want to remind you that we're cool with that. This was never designed to be a lecture setting. It was really designed to be some degree of conversation. Makes it a little more difficult as it's grown, but we still would love that. So if you're one of those people that has no problem unmuting and inserting yourself, feel free to do that as well. Myself, if it's Kay or myself or Aaron from our team, will be in the chat. So we'll drive a little bit of conversation in the chat. If you're watching this after the fact because you couldn't be on, we appreciate you watching the recording. We're going to send this out via email to you guys sometime in the next 24 hours. And it'll include the deck that is on the screen now, the recording video, and if there happens to be any other important resources, either that are planned or come up that you have to add to the conversation, we'll include some links to make sure that's there. Because you guys know that it says it right there on the screen, but our hope is to help you guys work on it to accomplish your mission. And so even when we remind you and send you Starbucks, the goal is for us to say, I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing for the next 60 minutes. Some of you lunch, others of you, whatever it might be. But we appreciate you guys carving out the time to kind of get up out of your Asana list and your meetings and all those things. And hopefully at least a nugget, if not more, of our conversation over the next 50 minutes will be beneficial. All right, cool. All right, we have three things that we're going to cover today. First thing, we just put this in the deck, but next year, we've said this to everybody, but you're going to hear about it every time you're on a call because we've tried to navigate these dates to make it as best as possible. We had an incredible time just 3 weeks ago with many of you in Vegas. It was just tremendous content. We would encourage you, if you weren't able to make it to Vegas, maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. You're like, that is a long way away. Totally get it. We would just encourage you, if our content, the things we talk about is helpful, go ahead and go into your calendar right now and just block that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And that way, when you forget about it for 6 months and then something starts to get plotted on there, you can navigate around it. So those are the dates in Vegas. We'll start registration sometime in the spring, but these are just for you to mark the date and save the date. And as a part of that, we wanted to get into today and kind of do three different things as time allows. One is we're going to do a little bit of there was one conversation as part of the Think Tank Live that we want to rewind for a few moments this morning. We're also going to give you just some feedback. It's October, so you probably have already made some decisions, key decisions around some of this, but we want to give you some of our informal stuff that we're hearing from people around Christmas times, and then maybe a couple nuggets around some stuff you may not be thinking about as you prepare for the holidays. And then as time allows, we're going to get into some futuristic 2024 conversation around, we're just calling it your yeses and your nos. You may be in that season where you're getting ready to look into 2024. Maybe you've already done it, but you need to scrub it again. Maybe we'll give you some food for thought as you kind of look at it. So I'm going to throw it to Kay, and he's going to have Shadi throw some stuff in here as well. We're going to start with this rewind conversation. All right, let's do it, Kay.
Yeah, good to see everybody. So basically, when we were at Think Tank Live, one of the things that we talked about, our theme was headwinds and tailwinds. Basically, what are the things that we're facing or that we're even seeing in other churches that they're facing and they're with challenges? And what are some trends that are tailwinds? What are actually propelling churches forward? And so, well, one of the headwinds that we talked about really was that staffers, many times the staffers are doers, not developers. This actually is a little bit of a byproduct. I didn't say this at the top, but this is a little bit of a byproduct of coming out of COVID season. Because guess what happened in COVID? We lost a lot of our volunteers. Staff didn't know what to do because they didn't really, their jobs were all shifting and changing. They grabbed onto doing the work. And then they're having a hard time letting it go, or we don't have enough volunteers. And so they're just holding on to some of those things. And so we are seeing this over and over again to be able to say, okay, staffers are doers, not developers. And that is a challenge that we're facing and that we're seeing in churches. So Lighthouse is actually a church that we work with here in Newberry Park, and Shadi is the executive pastor there. So I just thought that it would be great for him to share a little bit about what they're doing specifically around this. How do we move a staffer from a doer to a developer? So Shadi, introduce yourself a little bit. And one of the things that you have started at Lighthouse is a weekly meeting around this to be able to move a staffer from a doer to a developer. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, hey, everybody. Good morning. Yeah, I'm Shadi. I'm at Lighthouse Church, Newberry Park, California, close to Thousand Oaks area. And actually, I've only been here for a short time. I started in August, and I've had a close friendship with our lead pastor here, Pastor Kevin, for over a decade. We've done ministry together prior. I share that to say we're moving fast on some of this leadership development stuff, but that's partially because of the longstanding relationship and trust that we have and having worked together before. But my relationship with the staff here is very new. I mean, everybody other than one other person I met for the first time 3 months ago. And so came into Lighthouse Church, and the Lord is doing just beautiful work. And we are experiencing growth and things are happening. And what we're experiencing is that we have a team of great-hearted people that love the Lord. They love the house. They love our pastors. They want to be in this thing, but we're doing all the work. And we've gotten to the place where the nets are breaking, figuratively speaking, to where the increase is coming, the fish are coming, and the nets are breaking. And unless we mend the nets and bring in some more nets, we can't sustain this thing. And so normally if I were to come into something new, I wouldn't move this fast, this quick, build relationship first and lead through influence, lead through relationship, not through title. But there was also an urgency, which is why we started basically doing on these, and feel free to interrupt me, Kay or whoever, anytime.
Mm-hmm.
We started doing these Tuesday morning leadership development meetings. And it's basically to give our staff the tools to do the things we're asking them to do. I've realized that so many times on teams, we're bringing on builders, right? Or at least craftsmen, and we're trying to build this house. But not every craftsman is an architect. And I don't actually think it's fair to expect them to be an architect. If you're building a house, you need an architect to come in. And so what we're doing on these Tuesdays is architecture, giving them tools and language and practical steps on how. So we're, as pastors, coming in and saying, we've hired you to build teams, you're equipped to build teams. And honestly, what I'm hearing on the flip side of that is, but how do I do that? How do I do that?
And that is a common thing, right? Like, I'm sure that all of us have an expectation for our staff to develop teams, right? And many times you're basically saying, okay, we have this expectation for you to build teams, but to be frankly honest, there's a lot of staff that would basically say to you, I don't know how to build a team. So Shadi, tell us a little bit about that and how you work that into your weekly development meetings.
Yep, absolutely. So we started this, by the way, let me say, these are fairly new. Again, I've only gotten here in August, and we're phasing into this. And so we're laying groundwork. So this is kind of just a snippet. But what we started doing is basically giving them tools and language to do that. So oftentimes, when you're telling a staff member, let's build a team, let's get very practical for a second. Let's build a team. Most of the time, the staff will come and tell you, well, can we do a weekend announcement? Can we do a big push? Can we do a big event?
Anybody ever heard that before? Yeah, right.
And you're thinking, no, I've hired you to do that, not to come back and tell me to go do it for you on a weekend announcement. And so starting to craft the team's ideas and way of thinking into, we're going to use a fishing pole and not a net. This is going back to church planting mentality at the team level. We imagine we don't have a big congregation to make an announcement to, so we're using our relationships to recruit people. So what we talked about is spheres of influence. Basically the announcement to the church is the largest circle on the sphere of influence, and that's the last thing we do, maybe 1 or 2 a year. That's the net. That is not personal whatsoever. That's driven by vision, which is important, but it's not personal. The sphere of influence is what I'm encouraging the team to do, is make a list of everybody you know by name and have their phone number. If you don't know their name, don't have their phone number, they're not in the first sphere of influence. Make a list of those people and personally call them or have coffee with them and tell them, here's what we're doing, here's the vision. And by the way, don't lead with the need. People aren't going to respond to need, maybe immediately, but not long term. Lead with vision and purpose. And so start with the sphere of influence. Of course, the people that you recruit also have their spheres of influence. You start with the first sphere, and then what you do is now you have a group of friends or people that are connected to each other, serving together. So you have a strong core that you can build around. If you start from the outer core, you get a bunch of strangers together. It's possible, but it's very hard to develop that culture of friends that are serving together or people that are connected. The next sphere of influence is someone you may
time
know.
out just for a second, Shadi.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Everybody is on this call because you're in an executive position and you do this instinctively. The things that the staff, the reason why they gravitate towards the doers is because they haven't been trained, and the things that come naturally, that this is like, oh, I do this naturally, they're not doing naturally because they just don't know how to develop in teams. And so Shadi's breaking it down basically and sharing that with what he is teaching them to do. So continue.
One of the things, the other interruptions I'll make is, you remember a few months ago, we talked about that stupid analogy around watering plastic plants that some of you have stolen and used. It's kind of fits this conversation so well in the sense of, you know, hey, we're short on volunteers, you know, Shadi, get up on stage, somebody get up on stage and cattle call. And we think that more of the same is going to produce a different result. And so we just keep pouring water onto something that's not actually producing. So I think what Shadi's challenging us in is our teams are going to go back to that same well when they have this volunteer challenge. And we just need to be prepared as their leaders to potentially guide them down some new maybe it's not that innovative, but just some new thinking around how are we actually going to not just build teams, but actually develop them. So this is good stuff.
Yeah. And what you guys are saying is so key. I think what we're trying to articulate is basically what you guys said. We do this naturally. For most of us, most of our teams need very practical steps. Teach me how you do what you do. That doesn't come as naturally to everybody. And so this is giving them practical steps on how to do that. So those spheres of influences start with the people you know. If you are planting a church, you're calling all the people you know and inviting them to come along. It's giving them those tools to understand. Don't go with the wide net. Start with your sphere. That's how you build your area. And then the next sphere is people that are, you know, 2 steps removed. Either those people you've recruited know them or you know them from afar. And then you go to that, but now you're inviting them into a community that's connected. And the last step is, you know, we could obviously put more spheres into this, but the last step is the wide net approach. That's probably just 1 or 2 a year. That's for the people that nobody has yet connected to, but giving them a door in. And so just giving the teams, obviously we could break this down further. This is at a high level, just very practical steps. When I'm telling you to recruit teams, where do you start?
Yeah, that's good. Now, as they start developing the team, how do we now get those teams to be able to become owners, right? So I think that's the second thing that you want to talk about.
Yeah. How do we develop teams to become owners? Because what happens is we have staff that are doing all the work. And then when they recruit some team members, those team members often are showing up on the day of and asking, what do you want me to do? And we're just giving them tasks. And that's going to limit the ministry as well, because none of us are going to be able to hire enough people to do all the work. And getting the staff to understand my job is not to do all the work of the ministry, but to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry. Now, how do they might hear that, but what are the practical steps to do that? So at a very, again, ground level, this could be broken down even further. We've given them 4 steps. When you have people on the team, how do you move them to ownership where you can trust them week in and week out? And so basically, the first step is, as you have someone on the team, invite them to contribute ideas. Let me make this side note. For most teams, what we do is we start at point 2 and we end at point 2. We basically have a whole team of people that are doing tasks. And I think Phil Collins calls it the genius with 1,000 little helpers. I don't know if it was him or someone in another leadership book, where you basically have a
Phil
team.
Collins, the drummer?
No, not the. Who am I confusing that with? Who's you know who I'm talking about? Okay, help me.
Jim Collins,
It'll come
maybe.
back to
Jim
me.
Collins?
Jim
Phil
Collins,
Collins.
thank
I
you.
said
Yeah,
Phil
yeah.
Collins.
Phil Collins, the drummer in Genesis.
Thanks for
Yeah.
the save. I was like, why is everyone staring at me like that? Whose name did I say? But basically, we recruit all these people and they show up to receive tasks. That is not going to build a team. No one's and it's definitely not going to attract high-level leaders that are able to accomplish a lot. So let's walk through the 4 steps just super quick. First step is ask them to contribute ideas because before you have them own something, you want to measure their interest and even beyond interest, their bandwidth, their way of thinking, their creativity. Is it on the same wavelength? Do they have the vision? So you're just asking for ideas. And the good thing about that step is and by the way, this is what we're teaching our staff to do with their teams.
Yeah.
We do this naturally, of course, but basically, you're gauging all those things. And the good thing about this step is it's very low risk. I mean, worst case scenarios, they give you a bad idea and you're explaining to them why we're not taking the idea. And hopefully we have a team that can receive that. The second step is own a task. And so you don't want to jump from step 1 to say, okay, you're owning all our guest experience. Go ahead. That's not, and we have a lot of staff that are doing that as well. Just trying to, and so owning a task might be something specific on a weekend or for a month. And what you're measuring there is their commitment. So now I've seen their interest level. Now I need to gauge their commitment level. Can I count on them? Will they follow through? Are they in alignment? And can I count on them to come through on time every time that I ask them something? If that step is accomplished, then by the way, we can fast track people through this process or slow it down. The third step is own an outcome. And, rather than, hey, we're moving the guest lounge from this part of the lobby to this part of the lobby. Can you move this couch from here to here? Now we're saying, hey, we want the guest lounge now to be in this area. I'm giving a very how I would share this to the staff. Move the guest lounge to this area. Here's what we want it to do. Here's how we want it to feel. Here's how quickly we want people to be able to connect at it. You've given them an outcome. Make sure you don't give them the steps, because now you're measuring their ability. Can they own this outcome? If they go through all these steps, we're now giving them complete ownership of an area. This is how our staff very practically can move people from task-oriented to owners.
Hey, Shadi, you said earlier that you're just starting this. So all of the old Progeny veterans sitting here listening to you right now are going, sure, bud. So tell me, this is amazing. It's great stuff. Tell me, like, as you started to implement, again, you're in the beginning. How hopeful has this made some of your team as you've given them direction here? And what kind of pushback have you gotten, if any?
Yeah. Being completely real. So I've implemented this. I'm new here, but I've done this, for some time and have done it with other teams. And I've seen this be successful. And by the way, we're bringing them full frameworks and the team is helping build frameworks based on a, structure I'm bringing them to implement. What I'm realizing, just being completely real, what I'm realizing is as you start pressing on this kind of stuff, especially with a team that has done things very differently for so long, you have some people leaning into the press and some people leaning out of the press. That's just being real. So some people are like, this is what we've needed. Let's go. This is hard, but we're going to figure this out. And some people are like, whoa, why are we all of a sudden telling me how to do my job? And there's hard conversations taking place there.
Great.
Yeah, that's good. Shadi, what I would just say is, or what I would just add to this conversation is that every staff is going to be at a different level in development. And so the question that I would ask internally about each one of your staff members is, what is the developer version of them? For somebody, it might be a huge galvanizer that they're just like recruiting teams like a magnet that people are attracted to. And other people, it's going to look very differently. But the question to ask is, what is the developer version of each staff members? Because we believe that every staff member should be a developer in some kind of way. And I think these are just some practical ways to be able to do that. Again, we all do this intuitively and instinctively. We've got to teach it down to our staffs, or we're going to get the same result over and over again, and they're going to be doers, not developers.
Any brief comment on that, you guys, before we move forward? Just brief, but something to add at all? Cool. Thanks, Shaddy.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks, Shaddy. All right, let's talk Christmas service times. Most of you probably have landed on your Christmas times, but we did a poll recently and we talked to different people about what they are talking about and what their service times for Christmas is. And specifically, the tension is this, right? Will attenders treat December 24th, if you haven't looked at your calendar yet, 24th is actually on a Sunday. Will the attenders treat December 24th as more like a Christmas Eve day? Or will they treat it more like a regular Sunday morning, right? And your Sunday service times or your Christmas Eve service times might be slated towards one biased or towards the other, right? And people have landed on different ways around this tension. The next tension is, do we go with more options for service times or what will give us the critical mass at all services, right? That's a tension and a conversation that we're continually hearing. And the thing about Christmas is that, yes, Christmas, you will have more visitors come to your church than even Easter will has, because the unchurched specifically are more open to Christmas being a tradition and being part of something like this than necessarily celebrating Easter and Jesus's death and resurrection, right? And so that warrants you having additional services. But the other part of Christmas services, as you know, is that a lot of times families worship together. A lot of times we don't have all the kids programming that we would normally do on a regular Sunday. And so that actually gives builds the audience and the attendance on a Christmas service. So with these two tensions, we did basically a poll and we asked, and it was all over the map, right? So that's the first thing I want to share with you, right? As you can see, we'll give you guys the deck on this, but we just redacted all the church names, depending on what services, how many services are there, what days of the services, what times of the services, right? So you can take a look at all of those things, but here is the summary of all of this, okay? First of all, on Thursday and Friday, 24% of the churches are doing some Thursday or Friday services. And usually it's the larger churches that are doing 11 services or 8 services that are doing Thursday, Friday, okay? 81% of the churches are doing some Saturday afternoon or evening service, okay? As far as Sunday breakdown goes, 19% of the churches are doing only Sunday morning services. And usually it's on their normal service times. And they're saying, this is all we're going to do in the morning. 24% of the churches are doing only afternoon services. And then 0% of the churches are doing only evening services. Okay. But 57%, which is the largest of all the percentages here on Sunday, are doing a mixture of morning and afternoon services. Basically, when we talk about that first tension point, they're splitting the difference between, okay, we believe that some people will consider Sunday morning, Christmas Eve as a Sunday morning and a regular Sunday morning, and the other half of people or some portion of people will consider it as more of a Christmas Eve, and they'll want a later service in some portion of that time. So based upon all the research and stuff, if this is helpful for you in any kind of way, what we are seeing the most popular service times on Saturday is 5, 6, and 7. Obviously, we wouldn't encourage you to do all 3 of those. If anything, you do 2 of those and do 5 and 7. We're seeing a lot of that.
You could do
those are
all
the
3
most
if you
popular
wanted it
times.
to be really, if you want it to be really intimate, Kay. You could do all 3.
Or a short turnaround, right? So yeah, you could do that. That's Saturdays is most popular times. And then Sundays, the most popular times is 11, 3, and 5. And again, if you can see that, that's a little bit of splitting the difference. Basically, they've canceled their early morning service, their 8:30 or their 9 o'clock, and then they've shifted it more towards the afternoon or towards the evening. So we're seeing a lot of people do that. And so whether you've landed on your service times based upon some of this data that we've shared with even some of our people, they've even shifted and changed theirs because they felt like learning from other churches and best practices around this was helpful for them to shift. We know that staff actually prefer just to get it over with and just do a Sunday morning service, right? So if just left to them, if you were to decide, but what's one of the things that we talked about at Think Tank Live is what's effective is not necessarily efficient, right? So we're looking for the most effectiveness. And so
I think
what
one of
would
the
that
things
be?
that also plays into what Kay found in his survey we did is that I think all of you on the call, churches have I'll call it a Christmas culture. Like some of your churches, Christmas is right up there with Easter. It's a big deal, a lot of investment. Some of you, I've talked to you offline, it's sort of just another Sunday or another thing. And so I think that also plays in. I mean, you can argue about whether that's good, bad, or otherwise, but whatever your culture is, it plays into some of those decisions as to what you're going to do. For example, where I am, big deal. So we're one of those that shifted most of all of our Sunday services to what would have typically be our normal Christmas Eve schedule, with one exception, because we're normally a big Christmas Eve, come light a candle, invite somebody sort of a culture. If that's not you, then it probably would be strange for you to eliminate some of your morning worship gatherings.
Yeah, so it really does matter with context and what you do. Some of the questions that are asked is that do you do your normal services or do you do a special Christmas service? Everybody lands differently on that. One of the things that I've probably seen more than anything is that I wouldn't tinker too much with Christmas services. People expect traditions and people expect the silent nights and the candlelights and stuff. And when you actually go super differently from all of that, they actually miss that or want that, and so those are some of the things that we would say. And then, even Brian Becker says that we've chose the wrong service times to other churches, and that's the thing, right? It's all contextual, right? And it really is. And so I would really consider, some of these things. This is the last thing that we'll share around this, and that is that data is your friend around this, right? Look at 2017 data. Look at your Christmas Eve services and your attendance data from 2017. That was the last time that Christmas Eve landed on a Sunday. See where your heavy times were. That should inform you. It's better to look at 2017 data if you have it than it was last year, because last year it landed on a different day, right? So that's something that we would say. And then the second thing that we would say is start that communication then, starting from the first week of November. We'll give you an example of what a communication looks like. This is Crossings actually last year's, and so we'll give you a sample of what that looks like to be able to say, hey, there's a lot of things that are associated with Christmas, whether it be a Christmas lighting or whether it be a gift thing or whatever it might be that we'd be doing around that. And so think about your communication rollout plan, reverse engineer that from invitation to all the things that you need to lead up towards that.
One of the things that we discovered,
would just recommend.
One of the things we discovered that I wanted to make sure as Kay was talking, you got, is that if you are, again, if your Christmas is all about Christmas Eve, cool, right? But if you have sort of one of those environments where you're engaging people in some sort of serve, or you have some sort of Christmas series that then lends itself. What our strategy has been at many of our churches is the example that Kay just put up was kind of a holistic, here's what Christmas looks like pre-Thanksgiving, so that people can kind of plan like, okay, here's the things that we're going to be invited to participate in. That would be the holistic thing. And then we go back and we reverse engineer so that we're not communicating via the stage and app and everything every week for 6 straight weeks. So we give them everything, and then we communicate the most urgent things in a reverse order, leading up to, obviously, if you're doing Christmas Eve services that are a heavy invite opportunity, you want to spend the last 2 or 3 weeks really just focusing on that and the opportunity there to invite somebody. So we try not to muddle it all where we're going, here's the 7 things you can do at Christmas. We give it all to them at first through a document, and then we incrementally roll out in order of priority and date what we want them to focus on. So you may have a much simpler Christmas season. I'm jealous, but whatever level of complication you have, I would still encourage you to not just fire hose everybody every week. Give them the opportunity to be able to participate at the highest level they possibly can.
Cool.
Any questions?
Comments,
we had some in the chat. We had some in the chat.
I think we answered most of them.
Did you? Okay, cool.
If anybody wants to ask any questions.
Yeah. we didn't break down the Saturday stuff enough to know whether someone having a Saturday already did or not. So we didn't get that information.
Yeah, but I would say majority of the people that added a Saturday don't have regular
Okay.
Saturday services. So yes, 81% of the churches are doing a Saturday service, and probably only like 10 to 20% were doing the service.
That's good. Good catch. That's great. Josh asked, are most of the churches doing same program on Sunday morning as the evening? I'm gonna just
Yeah, we talked about that.
Yeah, you did? Okay, good. Awesome.
Mhm. Yeah.
Cool. Anything else?
All right.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity, and a time to lean in. So we will be praying for your Christmas services, and even as you lean in your service times. All right, Lee, take us to the last topic that we're talking about.
Yeah, so the last topic sort of it probably doesn't apply particularly to the holiday season, but maybe it'll we like to be relevant and also preemptive. As Kay and our team, when we talk about work on it all the time, this last 10 minutes will be very work on it centric, because it's going to ask you to get up a little bit out of what you may be pressing into right now and just get into going, okay, what does it look like? Most of you have probably, I would assume, based on the leadership on the call here, that typically you guys have spent time already looking at 2024 and looking at what 2024 looks like for you. But for some of you, you may still be in that process, and that's cool. I actually think for a lot of us, especially if we're more calendar year based, that's possible. So I wanted to just kind of preface this in kind of a yes or no conversation, because most of you on this call sit in a position where you're at least heavily contributing, if not actually green or red lighting what's going on environmentally, events, ministry, those sorts of things. So some of this will just be helpful review for some of you. Some of you are going to take this and immediately start implementing some of it. So the next slide is really kind of a holistic view of what we want to talk about in the remainder of our time, and maybe catch up on a lot of it later. So these would be the 4 principles that we would encourage you to think about when it comes to making decisions on yes or no. Are we going to do that? I guess I would add, are we going to continue to do that? I would also add the third question, is that the right time to be doing that? Would also be relevant to what's going on, right? So it could be a yes, no, or a win. As far as WHEN, we're doing it. So, and these really go along with a lot of what we emphasize with our church at Grow Minimum in our network. But number one is, we want you to add, and we're going to talk about each of these, but we want you to make sure that whatever we're doing aligns with our vision. Number 2, we want it to be consistent with our unique core values. Number 3, we want to have clarity around who is the specific target for that environment or that event or that ministry that we're actually doing. And Kay's going to talk a little bit about a new perspective we want to give you on that. And then finally, are we comfortable with the ROI? And we're not going to revisit this conversation that we had a few months ago, but most of you on this call, we've had this conversation around managing and measuring return on investment. Those would be the 4 key areas. All right. Before we get into the vision part, I just slid in here this idea of this would kind of be what I would encourage you to use as an order of operations for your future planning, if you're not already doing it, or when you do it in the future. Basically, and Kay loves this because it all starts with B. Right?
The opposite.
It's like a disease that I have. But anyway, number 1 is, as you're thinking about the yes and no, is we use a concept that we call bouldering. And if you're working with us, you know all about rocks. But bouldering is really the process of we're going to place on our calendar, right, the most important and the highest priority items first. The things that are immovable and also most in alignment with vision, values, target, etc. Those things are going to get placed first. So if you're one of those that's still doing that, everybody bring your calendar to the conference room and we're going to spend 6 hours throwing everything on the wall, stop doing that. Okay. Because you need to be determining What are the boulders? If you're doing a really important connection event that happens on a monthly basis and it's your guest portal, that is a boulder. It needs to be placed in its right rhythm, and everything else needs to operate around it. Okay, not the opposite. There are things that you're going to do that are easily boulders, i.e., some of our major holidays, Christmas, Mother's Day, Easter, those are obviously boulders, and however we schedule service. But there are other things that are going to be contextual for you that you're going to have to decide. And because the student guy thinks everything in student ministry is a boulder, does not make it a boulder. Okay, you get to decide what is a boulder for your organization based on vision, values, target, and ROI. Okay, then we would move to what is the budget based on the boulders, right? What are we going to allocate resources to? And then we would put the building blocks around it of the other ministries that actually enhance or elevate or accompany the boulders that are going on. So some examples of boulders might be if you're running a small group campaign 2 or 3 times a year, you're doing a heavy launch. If you're a rooted church where you're doing rooted in a rotation, those would be boulders where you wouldn't want things competing, right? And hear me, even on a marketing level, you wouldn't want things making more noise than necessary at a time where there are key mission centric things that are going on. Okay, so that should determine your yes or no. So bouldering, then bouldering and budgeting, and then the building blocks go in around those things, right? Some of you are even on this call and you started shifted. Maybe you're doing an SMP with us, you've done one, or you're doing one next year, or you're in it already and you're going to do a refresh. You're going to do a day refresh every year. We are realigning some of that. So like Derek Good and I just were working with his team a few weeks ago. They're realigning so that they do their refresh on where are we with vision, what's our 1-year plan, and then they go into the bouldering and the budgeting, right? Because what some of us do is we calendar, we make the budget, and then we go away on a retreat and we go, hey, here's the important things we want to do next year. But we've already set the calendar, we've already set the budget, and now we got to scramble or figure out how to do that. So whatever strategic planning you're doing needs to come as you get ready to boulder, budget, and build the building blocks. The bees, Kay, the bees, all right? He's just throwing up in his mouth right now, all right? And what he does, though, is he just encourages me to keep it up. So the more he gets annoyed, the more I keep it up, so.
Well, you got double points for
Building
building
blocks.
blocks. Yeah, that's actually next level right there.
See, Becker likes that.
Respect.
Brian Becker likes the building blocks.
Oh, BB. Oh,
Okay.
got it.
All right. So as a part of that, let's go back to those 4 main points. So number 1 is, as we decide our yes and no so that we can prep for our bouldering, et cetera, we want to align with our vision. Okay. So I put this back up on here for some of you to see. Many of you are familiar, but this is our alignment pattern for you. That we encourage you to operate in is this 10-year vision, 3-year view, 1-year plan, and then some quarterly priorities and rocks. So keep going, Kay. Move a couple forward, 2, 3 forward, unless I'm delayed. Yeah, keep one more. There you go. So you guys have seen this. Some of you go back. Some of you are operating under this. But when you do an SMP or when we spend a day with you, this is what our encouragement is. And this begins to drive what we're doing. And the only reason I put this on here is 1, because it's real important. But 2, if you don't know what the vision and the view is, it makes it really hard to align with vision, right? If it's vague or if it's sort of, if it's secret and you have to know the code, to do it, then it's going to be tougher to determine your yes and no's. Okay. So I put some examples on here. Kay will just kind of flip through them. These are the type of vision statements that we encourage and work with churches on. New North Church is a church in San Francisco. Rob Hall, I don't think he's on today, but they're in urban San Francisco. This is their 10-year vision, right? That they believe they want to be 3,000 disciple makers reaching and influencing Peninsula. That vision should have a role in how that team decides what they say yes to and what they say no to, right? That's a church in San Francisco. Then you go all the way to a church in Phoenix, right? Suburban Phoenix, Genesis Church, the church of 300 or 400. They want to be thriving, multiplying, an emphasis on reaching with an average weekend attendance of 600 people. And they have a facility that they have an entire shopping center that their 10-year vision is to convert that into a place where all of that North Phoenix is impacted. Okay, 10-year vision. The next one's a church that Kay works with in South Dakota. And I put it on here because no one thought that South Dakota churches would actually have vision. But if you live in Rapid City, this church is killing it. David Kinnan and his team in South Dakota, Rapid City is there. And then the last one is last couple, a church in Seattle. Kalos Church is a newer church that's there. I don't know if you've worked through this or not. Many of you on the call have. Many of you, maybe you're working with a senior leader and you're encouraging them at this point to do that. Align with your vision. So in the next year, if you haven't done it yet, our encouragement is to find holistic clarity around that vision. Make sure you know what it is. Make sure that it's clear. Okay. Secondly, we want to be consistent with values. And the three questions we always ask around values that's pretty simple, but speaks to this conversation is the idea of what are we doing in these values? What are we doing to actually embed or to actually operationalize the values that we say we have? So if you have a value that you say, this is who we are, our unique identifier, is it actually embedded in the org, or is it just kind of Hobby Lobby printed out on the wall? Okay. Then these last two are really important as you're bouldering and budgeting. How much of these values are used in your decision making? So you're actually thinking about who you uniquely are in your context as you make yes/no decisions, as you boulder, as you budget. And then finally, are your values actual or aspired? Because some of your aspirational values, if you determine them to be such, may determine where we need to put some emphasis in the coming year. Some of that even does eventually leak down into calendaring, bouldering, budgeting. Okay. If we're saying, man, we have a value around partnerships with our community, but it's way aspirational, we don't really do anything in our community, that would probably be a holistic conversation with your team around what do we need to do in our calendar and our budget to make that more true. Okay. I'll pause for a second. Any questions or thoughts on this? I know we're fire hosing you. Good? Because here comes the really good stuff. So then the third thing that is just fantastic is this idea of, do we have clarity on target? And before everybody loses their mind, because I realize that this conversation can get a little bit, are we targeting this group and not targeting that group and blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, do we understand specifically where our environments, our events, our ministries, what are they most likely to impact in the area of influence that we have? So I'm going to throw back to Kay for a second and have him talk a little bit about this Momentum Influence spectrum that we have put together. So he's going to put it up on the screen. I'm actually really excited about it. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, this actually came out of, we had something called a spiritual spectrum that we've been using, and man, it's been such a great tool for us. But when we thought about, let's say, for example, how people interact with our church or where they're at from a target perspective, one of the things that if we think about, let's say, for example, on the left side of the scale is the people who are disconnected from our church. And the right side of the scale are those who are connected. Now, the question that you might ask is, what actually crosses the line from disconnected to connected? It could be really contextual. It could be for you being a regular attender of the church, or maybe a self-identification, or maybe a next step. Whatever it is, you decide what the disconnected scale to the connected scale is. Okay, so for the disconnected, one of the things that we really believe that when somebody is a -5, they don't even know that you exist as a church. They might be driving by your church or never even seen your church before, or never even heard of your church. What we need to focus on there is an awareness strategy. Awareness strategy to be able to say, okay, hey, that's what we need to focus on to be able to move them down this spectrum to be able to get closer towards that connected scale. The next movement from the awareness is endearment. How do we endear them? Once they know who we are, awareness is no longer the gap, but now they know who we are. How do we help them to understand that we actually value them, that we care for them, that we're endearing them to see the value of getting connected with us, right? So going from the awareness to the endearment, that's the left side. Once they cross over towards being connected to your church in some kind of way, again, however you define that, we want to move them towards engagement. Okay. So engagement means when they first start engaging with the church, that might be at one level, but we want them to go deeper in engagement, or we want them to actually grow in their engagement with the church, so much to the point where they actually become a raving fan, an evangelist, somebody who's really excited about and shares with people who are disconnected on the other side of the spectrum, to be able to give them awareness, and then it builds back over and over again, right? So one of the things that we've used this tool and what we're doing around this is, I was just with a church in Seattle yesterday talking through the scale and being able to say, okay, hey, so-and-so, you mentioned this person, so-and-so, where are they on this scale? Oh, they would be probably a +1. In fact, they were a +4 pre-COVID, and now they're actually now a +1. Oh, that's fascinating. That's interesting. So then how do we increase engagement? Or there's somebody that said, this person was a +2, but now they're actually a -3 or -2. They don't even come anymore. They're not associated with any other church. So we don't need to get them engaged. We actually need to endear them. And it was actually really eye-opening for them to be able to say, whatever stage they're in, whatever the target is, that we actually have to focus on different strategies to be able to move them along this spectrum. Lee?
Yeah, one of the things that's great is if you do take the spiritual spectrum, which many of you are familiar with, and you lay it next to the spiritual spectrum sort of speaks to a person's relationship with Jesus and where they are in that relationship. And this really speaks to their relationship to your church, right? And so what I love about this is even thinking about in the context of bouldering and calendaring and budgeting is for you to look at this and go, as a church, where do we spend the majority of our energy? Is most of our calendar and budget geared towards engagement, +2, +3, +4? That would be a question. I'm just kind of add your own questions, Kay, if you'd like. But do we have enough +4s and 5s that are raving fans, evangelists, or do we just have a bunch of engaged people who need to be, and even what Shadi was talking about earlier, because part of evangelist tends to be people who have ownership, who are developed, who are leading, right? And then even the question of, do we have anything or enough things on the left-hand side, right? Where, for years I was kind of anti-marketing for churches, right? And I still lean that way, like it's friend to friend, friend to friend, friend to friend. But this kind of conversation we've been having sort of lends itself to go, are there things you might do that are just -4, -5 activities, right? And again, I'm not telling you go put a billboard up on the highway, but if you thought, some degree of awareness would be helpful, understanding. For example, those of you that were at Think Tank Live when Jeremiah talked about mailers and air cover, what he's really saying there, now that we have this spectrum, is we send out the mailers to hit the -4s and -5s. That we're not even expecting them to show up and become engaged. We just want to make them aware, because then when their neighbor invites them or they come to something, a trunk or treat or something, they already have an awareness of us, and now they're more likely to be endeared to us. And then they move over, and hopefully then we begin to move them towards steps of engagement. Okay, so I'll give you one example and we'll start to wrap. We do a tree lighting here at the Crossing. It's a lot of work and a lot of money. And so we had a conversation a few months ago around, do we even still want to do this? We didn't have this scale at the time, but now we've gone back and looked at it in the last 10 days. And we made a decision this year that our tree lighting will be a -3, -4 focused event. That if we're doing a tree lighting for +2s and +3s, I don't want to do it anymore. I love tree lightings, but there's no point in us spending all that time and energy to have all of our people at the church come to light the tree. That if we're going to do it at the level we're going to do it, then let's make sure it's a -3, -4. Makes people aware of us and they like us. They're endeared. That's cool. They did the tree lighting. My kid had a great time. It opens up the opportunity for them to, in the future, engage with us. Okay.
Well, what I would say is that the fascinating thing about this scale is it's actually for the +2s and +3s to move them to a +4 and 5 by inviting the people who are -4s and -3s, right? So you see how the scale now works, because if they're a +2 and +3, we're not going to do it for them. except for the fact that when we're doing a tree lighting, we can get them to a
Engage with
4 and
them.
5 an evangelist. Yeah,
Yeah.
to be able to bring that minus. So we're giving them a resource or a way to be able to invite them. And that's how we would market that, or that's how we would target
So
that.
if I was calendaring or bouldering, and we'll do this in the future, 2024, if you haven't done that yet, or even if you have, right, we're leaders, we can go back and reset if we want to. You know, we could use this as a tool to sort of pepper what we're doing. What are some, I'd probably put the boulders, I'd start with the boulders and go, where do the boulders hit? Again, and it's not about accuracy, -3, -2. It's really about the conversation that then lends itself to how do we approach it. Right. So your Christmas Eve services probably fall on here somewhere. And they're probably, I would say for most of you, they're likely an endearment, right? Like you have people that only Christmas, Easter come. And so they're probably not engaged with you yet because they haven't become even a semi-regular attender, but they're going to be more likely endeared if they show up and light a candle and hear the Christmas story. So keep that in mind as you boulder. Okay. Any thoughts or questions on this? Besides,
I have one lead.
Go
I
ahead.
got one lead.
go Adam.
That was really good on that spectrum. It helps me a little bit with my question, but could you elaborate a little bit more on the building blocks? Like when you were saying that you would build those building blocks around the boulders, like are you talking about like you would choose certain building blocks to surround boulders? You would choose certain building blocks not to surround boulders?
Yeah, when I'm using the term building blocks, I'm talking about the additional ministries that would not necessarily qualify as a boulder, right? So it would be important things. These are not non-important things, but they are building towards the boulders, towards the values, towards the vision, right? And so they are things that we shouldn't start with. I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head, but a care ministry environment or something like that, that would be an important ministry environment you might have at the church. But that care ministry environment should probably be aligned with your rhythm of how you're onboarding and assimilating people, if that makes sense, Adam. So it should not be positioned in such a way, depending on your context. I understand some of you are like, that's the most great. If you call that a boulder, great. But if you don't call it a boulder, then it shouldn't be positioned in a way where it does damage to the effectiveness of the boulder. So I'm using the term building blocks only because I think they're positive things, but they should be around those boulders, not in lieu of or in distraction from the boulders.
Okay.
So those would be, I mean, simply, those would be all the other ministry things that typically you would pepper the calendar with. My biggest thing I want you guys to hear is those should come after the boulders. That's the biggest thing. What are the boulders? And then don't put those on the board first. Put the boulders up and then build around the boulders with those other blocks. Cool?
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. All right, I want to be sensitive to time, so I knew we were gonna fire hose you guys today. Brian and Josh are canceling their billboard contracts. Sorry, guys. Appreciate you guys being on. We had one more slide, but it's stuff that you guys have seen before around the ROI conversation. And so if you have questions around that, we can talk about those. But obviously you have to weigh in on what are we spending? What are we spending on time, energy, attention, money? That should always be part of the conversation as you say yes and you say no. So a lot of ground covered in the last 60 minutes. Thanks for hanging in, you guys. Really appreciate it. If you know people that are not on the call, send them screenshots, tell them they missed it. Our goal here is just to partner with you to help you get what your mission is done better. And so, you know, if you want to invite some other people to call, great. If you want to have further conversations, reach out to us. We'd love to connect with you guys offline and deep dive a little further into it. All right, cool. We want to be sensitive to the fact that it's noon. Some of you have nowhere else to be, but a lot of you do. So that's awesome. All right. Thanks for being here, guys. Really appreciate it.